In April 2024, many of the best gymnasts in the world competed nationally, internationally, and globally in their preparations for the Paris Olympic Games. At the European Championships in Italy, the GB junior team took the team title for the first time since 2016, and in the senior event, Ukraine edged out GB to take the team title with a score of 255.7, which would have put them in first place at last year's World Championships. In the NCAA finals, Stamford made it 5 in a row, taking the team title, and individually, Khoi Young, Fred Richard, and Asher Hong were the standout performances. At the World Cup in Doha, the final Olympic apparatus qualification places were confirmed. And in Japan at the All Japan Championships, Daiki Hashimoto, who is the reigning Olympic champion, put up an average of 88 over 2 days, making himself the frontrunner going into the Paris Olympic Games. And this is my story. So there's been a lot happening in April in gymnastics, super busy month. You know, we had the British Championships back in March, lots of World Cup events happening, lots of competitions in America. The competition seemed to have stepped up a level. The European Championships is obviously a massive event. That's the first competition we're going to talk about today. And we're going to start with the juniors. I managed to watch most of the junior competition whilst I was coaching in the gym. That's the first time I've done that for a long time. Many of the gymnasts will know that when there's a competition happening midweek, you're in the gym training, so someone will have it up on their computer. You'll kind of have your go on the apparatus, then you'll run over, which is really cool because it's super inspiring for the young gymnasts. It was great to watch the juniors in the gym at Notts, who one of their teammates was in the GB team, Zakane. Watch him and be so excited and cheering them on. It was great. It made me feel really it was very nostalgic, but it was great to see them so excited for their teammate to go out and the rest of the team to try and win that gold medal. One thing that was really interesting around apparatus 4 or 5, one of the coaches came over and it was one of the female coaches in the gym at the time, and she said, the juniors aren't that good, are they? So they'll do well to get a medal. And incredibly, they went on to win the gold medal literally by less than 0.1, so not even a step or a deduction. It was less than a deduction, which just goes to show you really do have to fight for every single tenth. And I was very impressed with that junior team. Looking at them across the board, all 5 gymnasts, I think their difficulty as well as their execution was very high. The best I've seen from a junior team for a very long time, which is reflective of that result. You know, they took that team title. And I think individually they had some great results as well. Some of the performances that really stood out to me, Sol Scott on high bar, just beautiful lines. It's really interesting when you see juniors from a gymnastics club and their gymnastics is very reflective of the generation that came before them. I used to compete with a gymnast called Max Bennett from Huntingdon, same gym that Sol is from, and the way he performed high bar, Max Bennett, very similar to the way that Sol performed some of his skills on high bar. So it was really cool to see that. It's quite a common theme. You'll typically get gymnasts that train in the same gym, those younger lads that have watched their idols, I guess, and the senior gymnasts do specific moves and certain movements. They'll often move in a similar way. Very evident with the way that Dom Cunningham does his gymnastics and how similar that is to the way that Christian Thomas did a lot of his gymnastics. Just in small subtleties, the way that they do a turn on high bar and move their hands, very similar. That's just because they've watched it time and time and time again in the gym. So really cool to notice those little intricacies and that common theme. You can almost look at a gymnast and go, I can tell he's from that gym and his coach is that coach because they do that style of gymnastics. That's really cool when a club has its own identity. You get that in every sport, right? You know, a football club, for example, they'll play in a certain way. This is how we play. So that's really cool seeing that. So yeah, very impressed with his performances. I think one thing that really stood out to me that was really cool was there's definitely, as well as a new generation of gymnasts coming through in that age group, there's a new generation of coaches. And all of those coaches, aside from the coach there at Huntingdon, that is, you know, he might be onto his 3rd or 4th generation of kids now. He has Jake Jarman competing in the senior team. Those other coaches that were there and had their gymnasts being represented. So Josh Champion from Notts, you got Matt Firth, who's in Manchester at the moment, and Luke Folwell, who's in Birmingham. Their boys did very well, but they're the next crop of gymnasts that have gone on to do coaching. I often talk about, you know, there's a big gap where many of the best athletes don't move into coaching. Well, those 3 are 3 of the gymnasts that did do that. They were all gymnasts before to various different types of level. Luke competed at the very highest level. Matt similarly competed at a very high level, and Josh not quite as high, but they've moved into coaching. And it's taken about, I think all of them now have been coaching for over 10 years. So that's a great example for young coaches. You know, when you start out in elite gymnastics, you want to be a coach, and this could be anywhere in Europe, to be honest. The holy grail is the Junior European Championships. It's a big competition, the biggest competition you'll ever do. So quite often those targets, those long-term targets that a coach will set themselves, and my friends have done this, will be, you know, number one, a big step is getting a gymnast onto the GB team. That's great. And once you've done that, it's kind of the next big long-term goal is, can I get a gymnast onto a Junior European team? So for them, that would have been a huge target. It's, I imagine, been a very long process. That's 10 years. And it's about 10 years. If you're starting with a gymnast from the age of 6 or 7, you're taking them through to a Junior European Championships. You know, realistically, they're going to be about 15 or 16 by the time that they can challenge for a spot on that team. That's a 10-year process. So a great example for young coaches coming up now, don't rush that process. You know, make sure that you take your time. It's going to take 10 years. You know, they say it takes 10,000 hours to become a master in something. I'm sure that those coaches now have done way over 10,000 hours. I'm sure they're working 40-hour weeks. So, you know, I can't do the maths that quick in my head, but I'm sure they're doing thousands of hours a year, so it might be double that. So, yeah, really great example that the hard work does pay off, and their gymnastics from those junior boys, incredibly impressive. Not only the execution, I think, in the last 10 to 15 years, you know, British gymnasts, GB gymnasts have been well known for their execution, their style, but I was very impressed with their difficulty across the board. Seeing floor routines where nearly everybody's doing double-doubles, yeah, very impressive. Parallel bars, lots of gymnasts doing under somersaults with half turns. You know, we still probably a little bit weak on rings. And a little bit weaker on high bar overall, comparatively to other teams potentially, but everywhere else, particularly floor and vault. I don't know what it is about floor and vault, and this translates into the senior team as well, particularly with the success that we had at this European Championships. But British gymnasts seem to be really powerful and good on floor and vault, and we've got a tradition of that back in the 90s with Neil Thomas winning medals at Europeans and World Championships on floor. And then going into the 2000s with Dan Purvis, Christian Thomas, now you've got Luke Whitehouse, Jake Jarman. You know, we've got a real good track history of floor and vault. So, yeah, there's something in the water in GB, particularly within the coaching teams. They know how to teach those apparatus. So that's been really cool to watch that development. But, yeah, well impressed, very impressed with the junior team. I think individually as well, they did very well. So Gabriel Langton from Birmingham, Luke Folwell's gymnast, came third all around. Great result, really big result. You know, typically a junior gymnast that goes on to get all-around success in that competition, you know, they stand a good chance of going on to have a good senior career. The track record of that has been really positive, so I'm sure there's a big future ahead for him. He did individually, did pretty well, quite a few finals, took a medal on rings, and then Sol Scott as well did really, really well. I think he took the gold on vault, and then on parallel bars, Uzair, who's another gymnast from Huntingdon, so 2 young gymnasts from Huntingdon. I'm sure they've benefited from being in the gym with Jake Jarman over the past few years, but also the gymnasts that came before them, so Lewis Smith, Dan Keatons, and all that knowledge and expertise that exists within inside that gym. It's a very special club. They've got an incredible track history of winning Olympic medals, world medals, European medals, so they know how to do it. Yeah, so just an amazing team. And, you know, I spoke to a couple of people that are out there watching, and they said the thing that really did stand out was just the level of quality and assured performances from the juniors in that competition, the GB juniors. They really did stand out in comparison to the other teams. So, yeah, really cool. Super impressed. Buzzing for those guys. Like I said, really happy for Zakane and Josh. Josh has obviously been on the podcast. That is a massive achievement. And it's certainly not just those two. You know, Zakane and Josh, the majority of the work was done by them, but it's a real club effort. So all of those gymnasts that have been out there and won a gold medal at that Junior European Championships, all their clubs, all the staff and all the other gymnasts in those gyms, not only the ones that are training right now, but the ones that came before them, have played a part in that result. So that's amazing for them. And yeah, top of Europe again, which is super, super exciting. I'm sure there's some people out there that will think, well, you know, the Russians weren't competing, but you look back at 2010, the Junior European Championships, where myself and my teammates went and we won the team medal for the second time, and I won individually. There was actually a volcano in Iceland, of all things, and Ukraine and Russia couldn't fly and make it to the European Championship, so they didn't compete. And ultimately, you can only compete against who you can compete against, and I would stack them up against the Russian team 100%. Those juniors, I think they were very, very strong. They all looked, one thing I would say as well is they all look very strong. Quite big, well-built gymnasts. I think maybe in the last few Junior European Championships, particularly even the team that competed in 2014, 2016, weren't necessarily the tallest or the strongest or the biggest team. Definitely look like juniors. These guys look like they're potentially going to transition into senior gymnastics a lot easier. I think one thing to look out for is that the rules will change after this Olympic Games, which is going to make a huge difference, particularly for those juniors. And I think that's one reason why in the last 6 years, I'd say, the juniors from Great Britain and everywhere around the world ultimately have struggled to transition into senior gymnastics as quickly as my generation did, because junior gymnastics went down to 8 skills in a routine instead of 10. When I was a junior, I'd still do 10. So when I'd step up to senior, I was already doing 10 skills. So in terms of the cardio, it just wasn't difficult for me to do that, make that step up. I was already doing it. I've been doing it for years. Whereas those juniors had to jump from 8 skills to 10 skills. That's huge. So I think that's really played a massive role in that time in which those juniors, and when I'm thinking about that generation, I'm thinking about probably the likes of the team that represented GB in 2018 time, and 2020, that kind of period, they struggled to step up so quick. So you've seen a lot of the GB team now, they're a little bit older, a bit more mature. You know, outside of Jake has certainly transitioned. The other guys, they've struggled to make that transition. I think it's that step up to 10 skills is really hard. That's going to change because the senior gymnastics is going down to 8 skills. What that's going to do is bring everybody closer, because you now can't have somebody, let's say even on parallel bars, so the Chinese gymnast, Zhu, who is light years above everybody, he's going to come, it's going to bring him much closer to the rest of the world because he doesn't have the potential to pull away in terms of difficulty because he's only got 8 skills to work with. So that's going to be really interesting, really to see how that develops into the scores and how close those scores are in the finals of apparatus, but also in the all-round and the team. I think it's going to make it much more exciting for the spectator to watch. You're not going to see teams on the women's side. You've had American teams in the past winning by up to 10 marks. You're just not going to see that anymore because everybody on the men's side is going to be super, super tight. So yeah, really exciting to see that change. And I think these juniors will massively benefit from that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these juniors stepping up into the senior team already potentially next year and the year after, because a lot of the guys in the team right now in the senior team are definitely towards the end of their career. I'd expect 2 or 3 of them to potentially retire in the next 12 to 18 months, and I think some of those juniors will fill that gap quite quickly. So yeah, super exciting for those guys. And the senior event, Ukraine edged out GB in the team final. It was a great team final. Super impressed with the finish scores. Again, spoke to somebody that was there watching the competition. Their feedback and observations to me were that actually the quality of the work and the consistency of performances were way higher than the World Championships last year, which is great to see. You'd expect that because by this point, everybody should be performing their Olympic routines, and they should have been working on them. You'd expect them to have been working on those routines for probably around 6 months now. So they should be solidified. So it's all about those smaller details. So I think that was evident in the team final. Ukraine and GB both hit 18 routines. To hit 18 out of 18 routines in a team final is a very difficult thing to do. If you're hitting 18 routines out of 18 and you're one of the top teams, that really is going to put you in with a medal shout. And again, that score of 255.7 would have beat Japan at the World Championships last year, which is massive. Now, there's an argument to say the World Championships scoring is going to be a bit harsher than it would be at a European Championships, but they're still going to be in there. That Ukrainian team, it's a really interesting team. They're almost like a team of Avengers because they've all got really different physical makeups. You know, you have Radovilov, who's strong, big, looks like he can run through a brick wall. Then you've got Oleg, who's a bit older now, still quite slim in stature. I don't know what he weighs, but I imagine he's weighing less than 60 kilos. You've got 2 juniors coming through, well, 3 juniors essentially coming through. You've got Kovtan, who is probably the second best all-rounder in the world at the moment. His build is really confusing. He looks heavy, strong, but he performs his gymnastics as if he weighs 55 kilos. So he's a real physical presence. His demeanour when he's competing, I think, is his biggest asset. Never looks flustered, ever. Incredibly calm, very well-rounded across the board. For someone of his build, performs really well on pommel horse, high bar. So super impressed with his gymnastics. He's definitely going to be someone that's going to try and push Hashimoto at the Olympic Games. But their team, yeah, and they've got a new young gymnast. I think he was 18. his build is a lot slender. Reminded me a lot of Ukrainian gymnasts of the late 90s and early 2000s. So there was a Ukrainian gymnast called Roman Zazulia that did beautiful gymnastics, real technician. Valery Goncharov competed at the 2004 Olympic Games. High bar on parallel bars, was unbelievable, Olympic champion on parallel bars. It's interesting. Ukrainians, since the breakup of the Soviet Union in the mid-90s, they've always had incredibly good technical gymnasts. Even when I was competing, I remember I went to compete in Ukraine in 2006, I think, and there was a 13-year-old that was just unbelievable. There's a young kid about the same age in Ukraine at the moment that is making waves, that is doing just outrageous gymnastics. You know, you're hearing things of him training 10 hours a day and all this kind of stuff. Be interested to see how that translates into senior gymnastics and whether he can keep that up. But yeah, super impressed with that team. It does frustrate me somewhat that it's never even mentioned in broadcasting, that Oleg had to take some time out of the sport for testing positive for a substance. I know that ban was reduced. That does frustrate me sometimes, because it's just very confusing for me that you can just come straight back into the sport and, you know, no medals were ever stripped from that. So that does make me question things. But, you know, ultimately you have to go out there and you have to perform, and it doesn't take anything away from the technical expertise that they've got in their team. So, those 5 guys, incredible. I'd expect them to push. They impressed me a lot. I think I wasn't expecting that level of a performance, and I think as a whole team, they really could challenge for a medal, which would, regardless of what you think politically is going on in that part of the world, that would be an incredible achievement, because, you know, they surely have faced some incredibly tough times and challenges. I'm sure they've got relatives and friends and people that have been involved in that conflict. So an incredible story. I'm sure the media are going to make a massive thing of it, but they're right there. You know, it's not one of those situations on TV where someone's got a sob story. They are producing some of the very best gymnastics in the world. And we always say that it's incredible how well GB are doing. They're outperforming themselves, but I'd argue that Ukraine are even better. They're even more outperforming themselves. You know, the resources that they'll have at their hands, that really does show you that it's that technical knowledge and expertise and the coaching that they've got there and a system that they've got in place that's making a difference. You go over to the GB team, they were only 0.3 behind. That's one step. That's a shoulder width step from the Ukrainian team, just behind the Japanese score from the World Championships last year. So I think that will give the GB team a lot of confidence. The big thing, I think, was the professional performance from them. Very well experienced team now, even with, you know, still a couple of youngsters in and amongst the team. Some last minute changes. Max pulled out with an injury to his hand. The extent of that injury, I'm not sure. I'd expect him to still be fit in time for Paris and the Olympic Games. It certainly does throw a spanner in the works with the team doing so well, particularly in the team event after probably an uncharacteristic performance in the qualification by Joe Fraser, but I think that's on the back of Joe doing so well at the English Championships and the British Championships. So, you know, that doesn't worry me at all. And I think, considering all of that, he did really, really well in the team final to produce a great performance. I think that Luke Whitehouse's back-to-back gold medal on floor and becoming a double European champion, it's got to throw a spanner in the works, I think, to an extent. I hope it does. You know, he should surely be in that conversation now. But yeah, going to be very difficult for the selectors. I think a lot will ride on Max and his recovery. Again, it's going to be very difficult for them to leave him off the team. He's got that track record. He produced the performances he needed to at the English and the British. He's got those big, massive sponsors behind him. He's the face of the games. You see him on TV on all the adverts now. So, you know, at the very least, I'd like to see Luke thereabouts amongst the reserves, but what team they pick and which direction they go in terms of, are we going for a team result or are we going for individual results, I just don't know. Super excited to see. Yeah, really excited to see. I know that the team is going to be selected pretty soon. From what I remember from our last episode where we did a gymnastics update, the team was going to be selected in May, so the team will know the results of that selection pretty soon. It will become public knowledge in June, I believe. So yeah, exciting to watch that. But yeah, some incredible performances. James did amazing. I think since his kind of somewhat shaky performances at the English and the British, he looked very, very solid. It's going to be so difficult to leave any of those guys off the team. To go and hit 18 routines under pressure. Courtney, did a massive job again. He just seems to be getting better and better. I think that dad energy is a real thing, man. Like, you know, Harry's kind of got the better of him so far this year on rings, but Courtney stepped his game up, scored 14-7 in the final on rings. I think he's smart move to change the construction, take out that Russian lever cross. The routine's a lot cleaner. Stuck his dismount again. So, to put up such a strong rings performance, I hope he's done it, man. I really hope he's done it. What a story that would be. A third time of trying to make it to an Olympic Games just shows you that you can really get better with age. And I do think that this is a sport where, you know, your experience and your knowledge later on in your career can really pay dividends if you look after yourself. I think back to when Courtney was 23, 24, 22, even a bit younger. There'd be quite a few conversations around the amount of training he was doing, and that he wasn't doing enough training. And I look at it now and I go, well, you know, he certainly knew what he was doing, and that kind of saying of training smart, not just training hard, is paying dividends, because, you know, he's getting better and better. So, yeah, super excited to see what happens with Courtney there. Also, a shout out to Courtney. He took a bronze medal all around at the British Championships, and I believe he finished 12th all around. 12th all around in Europe for somebody that's not an all-arounder is an amazing achievement. And thinking back to when I came sixth at the Europeans all around in 2015. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but when I retired, that's probably one of my proudest achievements. So I think that's something that Courtney will look back on in time and be really, really proud of. Like, an amazing achievement. I don't know where that sits him in the rankings of European all-round results, but certainly probably within the top 10 gymnasts in terms of an all-around ranking result. So yeah, amazing achievement by Courtney. And performing on floor, I was very impressed with his floor routine. That's a floor routine you could definitely put up in Olympic Games. Landings were great. Struggled with landings in the past, but looked really solid. Harry, good performances again on rings and vault in the team final. Not sure why Harry's not performed floor. He's not performed floor a couple of times, so if there's anyone out there that does know that, whether he's carrying a little injury or a knock, it might just be the consistency of his performance in training. But so not sure why Harry's not been competing on floor, but again, did a great vault, great rings, real great asset to the team. In terms of Joe, like we said, that qualification struggled a little bit. I think he's struggling a bit with niggles. It's not a surprise. You know, he came back from 2 surgeries last year. He's managed to get back and probably surpass many people's expectations in how well he did at the English and the British. And this is probably the time where that sheer work, the emotional toll it takes on you to get back, is starting to just get to him a little bit, starting to stack up. So I think all he needs is just probably a little bit of time to decompress and then go again. You know, the hardest thing for an Olympic Games, I remember in the lead up to 2012, those last couple of weeks of training, like Christian was really struggling in the gym, and I was kind of a little bit concerned watching him train. And then as soon as he got there, he switched it on, and it's the best I've ever seen him. So those experienced guys, they'll know right now in their head that sometimes you just have to do enough to get on the team, and then you can peak for that day when you've got to put your hand up. So it is about doing enough to get onto the team, but not overextending yourself to the point at which it's really difficult then to peak for the actual big event, which will be that Olympic Games. So they've got the experience and the coaches behind him. They'll be planning for that. And then, like I said, in terms of Jake's doing really well. Jake's massively stepped up his difficulty, and I think his execution and performances on the other pieces. I think if we had any weak spots in the team final, it'd probably be one rings routine. Interesting that they didn't put Joe or James up on rings instead of Jake, just because of difficulty. I would imagine that's probably something to do with shoulder issues with Joe and maybe back issues with James, but I'm not sure. And then again on high bar is our weakest event. High bar is definitely our weakest event comparatively to the other teams. Japan, it's their best event. America, very good on high bar. China, again, very good on high bar. Even Ukraine, not bad on high bar now. So high bar is an event they'll be looking at to try and increase those scores. I think scores were all pretty much in the 13s. Joe can definitely do a better performance than the one that he did. I think it was a great performance under pressure, especially to stay on after his casino. But high bar is going to be an area they're really going to be looking at. That's where I think they could raise the score to maybe 256, 257, because you've got to expect every team to be raising their team score by about a mark, 2 marks for the Olympic Games. So yeah, I think high bar is an area they've got to look at. But Jake has that difficulty. Whether it's going to be ready for the Olympic Games, I'm not sure. His casino on Highbar is just one of the best casinos out there. I'd love to see him do it. I'd love to see him add in some of those in-bar moves, so that squat half as well, and just see what he does. But, that might be a situation where if GB are in with a medal shout in the last apparatus, he's now become that guy that they put up for the last routine to hit his routine. I can't imagine he's going to do that under pressure, but he might be able to do that for the all-around, step up his all-around score, and he'll be there within the mix for an all-around medal for sure. I think Hashimoto is going to be miles ahead of everybody else. But yeah, they would be my expectations. But yeah, the observations. I think the last thing was the person that I spoke to about the European Championships and their big takeaways was that the layout of the arena makes a big difference to the spectator's experience of watching the sport. So he said that the apparatus was spread out so much that in order to watch the apparatus as your favourite team move around, you had to move around the arena, and it caused quite a bit of chaos with everybody constantly moving around the arena. So I think the apparatus were too spread out for the spectators. It works for TV, right? Because on TV you're only watching one apparatus at a time. But I think for the spectators in the arena, yeah, that was a bit of a challenge. It's something to look at maybe whoever's organising the next big major competition. The Olympics will have been decided, but whatever the World Championships are next time, next year, or the European Championships, they should definitely take into consideration the fan experience when they're in the arena watching. You don't want people moving around to be able to see all the apparatus. That just causes chaos. That worked because, again, there was not many people watching the competition, which is something that we're still struggling with as a sport, engaging people. It's a surprise because for me, Spain, Germany, Italy, France, these are massive gymnastics nations. These are countries that all have leagues. They've got leagues. You can go to Germany and compete in a gymnastics league, and there's not just one league, there's 3 or 4 leagues. Same in France, same in Italy. So gymnastics is huge in Europe, in those countries. So the fact that they can't sell out stadiums confuses me. I don't know whether that's something to do with the promotion of the event, but something needs to be done with that, because it's not a good advert for the sport when someone's watching on TV and there's nobody in the stand, because you're going, why is nobody watching this? There's a disconnect there. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at, probably by the UEG and the FIG. Going into the next cycle, how can we fill out stadiums? So that's something definitely to look at. And I like the fact that they did the team final on the Sunday. The team final is the most exciting competition to watch. I've said that many times on this podcast. I think many people agree with me. So the fact that they did that last instead of first in the week was great, because Monday to Friday, most people are at school, at work, they're going to miss it. But on a weekend, you've got that time to sit down and watch the gymnastics. Gymnastics events are quite long-winded, right? It's not 90 minutes like a football match. It can be 2.5, 3 hours. And in the week, you just might not have the time to do that. So you'll definitely get more people viewing and watching on TV if you put that team final right at the end. How hard that is for the gymnasts to stay at that high level, knowing they're potentially the all-arounders might have to do 5 or 6 routines on the Sunday. I'd love to hear from someone that's experienced that, the Europeans. I'm sure it's pretty difficult, but in terms of the spectator and the sport, I think it's a great decision. So really smart from whoever made that call, and hopefully we see more of that in the future. Next competition we're going to look at is probably the World Cup circuit in Doha. So all of those individual apparatus places were confirmed. They pretty much all were my expectations from the last episode that we did. Bar one on floor, the Croatian, Benovic, he took the place. That was a little bit of a surprise, but he's been doing well in that circuit, but I expected somebody else to probably take that spot. So just to confirm, I'm going to go to my notes for this one so I don't get people's names wrong, but on floor it was the Korean gymnast, Ryu Sung-yuan, Croatia, Aurel Benovic, so they got the 2 spots. On pommel horse, the gymnast from Jordan, Ahmad Abu Al-Soud, he took the spot. From Kazakhstan, Nariman Kurbanov, they took the spots. What's interesting about their routines is there tends to be a trend now with taller pommel horse workers. They have a very similar routine, and those routines seem to be very consistent and score really well in terms of execution. I'd love to know from one of the top specialists on pommel, like Reese, who has a very different routine and quite a difficult routine, and also Max, what they think about that construction of that routine, because those guys just seem to be hitting every single time. And, with Max and Reese, they're taking that risk of the difficulty of the triple Russian on one handle. There's always that element of risk there. So I expect those 2 gymnasts that have taken those spots to really be in with the mix for the medals. And it's not just those 2. It tends to be typical of a lot of the taller gymnasts. Everybody tries to get the path of least resistance, and what happens at the Olympic Games is that everybody ends up doing a very similar routine because that's the best way to get the best result in terms of the difficulty in the execution. So normally, at the start of an Olympic cycle, everybody will be experimenting a little bit, but by the time you get to an Olympic Games, the routines in the finals end up looking very similar because essentially it's just the best route to victory. So there's going to be a lot of those similar tall gymnasts doing those routines with lots of travels. Typically, gymnasts are doing less flair work in this cycle, so it's going to be interesting to see how they stack up against the likes of Rhys McClenaghan, Max Whitlock, some of the other best pommel horse workers that have kind of a more traditional routines from the last couple of cycles, and see how they stack up against each other. On rings, it's Davtyan from Armenia and Samir Ait Saeed. Incredible achievement. You know, I remember him back in 2016 shattering his leg. I saw him on a TV advert. I think it was a Renault advert about 6 months ago, and I was like, oh wow, he's still doing a bit of gymnastics. And then all of a sudden, he's taking the spot on rings for the Olympic Games. So yeah, really cool. Amazing that it's in Paris. He's going to be trying to push himself to try and get a medal. That would be an incredible story. So again, I'm sure it's going to be a story that gets covered at the Olympic Games a lot. On vault, we've got the Iranian Alafti, really cool vaults. That Yurchenko double pike, I love it. I think in the next cycle, we're going to see more gymnasts doing that, opting for that vault. And also, I don't think we're far away from seeing people do Yurchenko double-double on vault. So whoever's going to be the first to do that, it's going to be really, really cool. But I don't think it's too far away. And Shek Wei Hung from Hong Kong as well. Amazing to see him do that. He's doing some incredibly difficult vaults. So great to see him representing his country again at Olympic Games. He competed in Tokyo and he's done very, very well on that World Cup circuit. His vaults are very risky. I would not like to be standing at the end of the vault when I'm trying to perform those vaults consistently. So yeah, he's done very, very well. P-bars, we had Barajas from Colombia. Really glad he's qualified. His P-bar routine is great, but for me, his high bar routine is just amazing. He didn't take a spot on high bar, but I'm glad he got that one on parallel bars. And then the other gymnast on parallel bars was the one that I really liked when I was doing my research for the last episode. Just beautiful lines on parallel bars. From Uzbekistan, Razulyun Abdurakimov. Hopefully I pronounced his name close to correctly, but his gymnastics is beautiful on parallel bars, so I'm really excited to see his routine at the Olympic Games. His lines are just some of the very best, so yeah, excited to see him. And on high bar, it was from Chinese Taipei, it was Tang, again, doing that really cool, unique high bar routine with a Markelov with full twist. Also changed his varieties, doing Kovac releases and Kachevs, so it's going to be great to see his routine. I expect him to be in the final and to be challenging for a medal. And then Robert Tvorgel, who competed against me at the Junior European Championships in 2010 that I spoke about, and I think he took the silver or the bronze medal in the high bar final back then. 2 years younger than me, so he must have been 15 or 16 at the time. So yeah, amazing achievement. The fact that he's still competing 14 years later, and he's qualified for the Olympic Games through high bar is great. So yeah, expecting all of those guys to challenge for medals, to be honest. I think that World Cup circuit was a great thing. They got it right, I think, this time. I think they've probably got it wrong the last few Olympic cycles, but it seems to have been really positive for the sport and the quality and the level of those places. All of those 12 guys that have qualified are final and medal challengers, which is brilliant to see. I think the next competition I'm going to look at is the NCAA finals. So I managed to watch that over the weekend with Aussie, which was pretty cool. Not really watched the NCAA finals before. One thing that struck me again, and I spoke about this in the last episode where we looked at the American team, was just the depth. The depth they have, man, like across the board from all of those top 6 teams and some of the individuals. Amazing. Really, really impressive. And that's obviously translating into how many strong all-rounders they've got individually in their team now. Stamford made it 5 in a row. So they've won 5 back-to-back NCAA titles as a team. They looked a very strong team. Michigan looked like they were in with a shout. And then there were a few uncharacteristic mistakes from some of their team members. It looked like Fred put out some new gymnastics. So those elements that he was talking about when we spoke to him on the podcast, those new skills he was thinking about, looks like he's putting them out now. Now is the time to do it. He still did well, finished second in the all-around, but made an uncharacteristic mistake on high bar. Looked like he put the long swing Diamidov in on P-bars, a bit of a new construction on rings. Looks like he still needs a few more weeks, a few more months of work on that. I think his last Maltese strength hold position probably didn't hold for 2 seconds, was a bit short. It's difficult to know in terms of the scores in the NCAAs, just how inflated they are. To me, they didn't seem like they were too inflated. They seemed pretty pretty on point with probably the scores that were being scored at the Europeans. So that was interesting, whether that's a conscious effort, because the selectors for Team USA know that lots of those guys competing in the college system right now are going to be in contention for the Olympic Games. Khoi Young won the all-around, got a big score, around 85, 86. I'd expect him to be into the team. Some of his techniques are, they're a bit different, particularly on P-bars. Some of his actions, he tends to pike his body. It's a bit of a different shape than you'd expect from most gymnasts, but he's super light. Incredible on pommel, then really good on vault. So a bit of an anomaly in terms of the apparatus that he's good on. He did really, really well. I expect him to be competing maybe 3-4 events for the team, for USA, if he qualifies for team. Pommels is going to be a huge one for him. Great pommel horse worker. And then Asher Hong, for me, was a standout performer. Khoi Young and Asher Hong are actually the two athletes that I completely missed from the last episode. And I'm not sure whether that's because I didn't see them perform in that competition that I watched, which was the Winter Cup. But a couple of people gave me some feedback and say, hey, how come you've completely forgot about those two gymnasts? They were at the World Championships, they won a medal, so they're definitely going to be in with a shout. And yeah, Asher Hong for me was the real standout. Really cool. He has such a cool pommel horse routine for his build. He's short, strong, quite stocky, amazing on vault, incredible rings routine. Positions just super strong, not wavering at all. Really good on parallel bars. But yeah, to then be so good on pommel horse, I really enjoyed his pommel horse routine. It was amazing. So he's definitely going to be there. Brings a massive energy. He's the type of performer that, all the Americans, they tend to, after the performance, really get the crowd going, screaming. I'd say there were more people watching the NCAAs and the men's team final day than there were at the Europeans, which is interesting. Typically, the NCAAs in America and the men's side, they tend to struggle. A lot of those teams financially tend to struggle in comparison to the women, but hopefully the real increase in spectators and also fan engagement on the women's side is translating a little bit to the men's. I know there's a real kind of, like we were talking about with Sam just beforehand, there's a real subculture on the internet in terms of gymnastics community that massively follow a women's college system, but that's translating into quite a lot of people following the men's program. Even since we started this podcast, I've noticed there are quite a few new specific Instagram, YouTube channels, podcasts focused on men's gymnastics, which is great to see. That's really, really cool. I hope there's more and more of those that pop up in the future. And hopefully that does translate into more popularity within the sport. Something's working, something's happening a little bit, and hopefully we can continue that momentum. So yeah, we're going to do more of a specific episode when it's the American Championships. Someone from Neutral Deductions got in touch with me, said they really enjoyed the podcast. They'd be more than happy to have a conversation around the Americans, their system, how they're going to select their team for the American Championships and the Olympic trials and how that works. So that's going to be really cool. So we're going to do that at some point in the future. And then I think the last competition that I'll talk about today, just before I move on, actually, Yul competed in the Pacific Rim Championships, I think, and did really well again. So he scored 84 plus. Americans did well. I think they pretty much cleaned up. Again, like I said, they've got quite a lot. They've got 5-6 guys that can score over 83, 84 at the moment. So yeah, their depth is going to be a problem for the Ukrainians and also the British team at the Olympic Games, and also some of their individual performances. So yeah, the last competition I'm going to look at today, and we're only going to focus on Daiki Hashimoto, is the All Japan competition. First big Japanese competition of the year. He competed. The great thing about the Japanese is that they normally do 2 all-arounds back-to-back, which is definitely a reason why they do so well at major championships, because they're used to competing day after day and doing 6 apparatus. So if that new format of having the team event on the last day was to happen in the future more and more, that would suit them massively, because they're so used to doing all around back to back, which is a really hard thing to do. And like I said, he essentially averaged 88 on both days. I don't think anyone's getting near to that score at the moment. The next best scores is around 86, really. So he's kind of got a bit of a gap between him and everybody else. I'd expect the other gymnasts to close that gap in the next 2 months heading into the Olympic Games, but how much they can do that and how much difficulty they can add, I'm not quite sure. I think across the board, I was thinking of it, I was trying to compare him to Uchimura's gymnastics, and I think that he's maybe more of a complete all-arounder in the sense that Uchimura's weaknesses, Hashimoto is stronger than him on. So pommels, rings, and probably consistency on vault, Hashimoto has got the better of Uchimura, I think. And on face value, before I thought about Uchimura's performances at the 2016 Olympic Games, I felt that he was probably he was maybe better on floor, high bar, and parallel bars. But actually watching it, I think Uchimura's line and style and the aesthetics of his gymnastics is still a level just above Hashimoto on those apparatus, so Uchimura's strengths. So I think on Uchimura's weaknesses, Hashimoto's got the better of him, but on Uchimura's strengths, I think he's still just a bit above Hashimoto for me personally. But as an all-around performance, I think he is the more complete all-arounder. That probably translates into, maybe higher scores and a bigger gap between second place at the moment. But yeah, I'd love to have, in a different reality, it'd be great to see them two go head to head against each other. We never really got to see that. In Tokyo, Uchimura was just competing on high bar. So yeah, he is the reigning Olympic champion, reigning world champion, is certainly the one to beat. He can do a 3.5 on vault. I don't think we'll see it at the Olympic Games. I don't think he needs it. I think he'll try and stick that triple twist. His floor routine is really cool, a really well-rounded routine. He's competing triple double somersaults and good combinations. I love his pommel horse routine. I think it's beautiful. His rings as well. I think he's massively improved his strength skills, the positioning over the past 4 years since the Tokyo Olympic Games. So I'd expect his ring score and execution to be higher than it was 4 years ago. Like I said, vault is very solid. Parallel bars, just a good solid routine. A typical routine, I think. Lots of gymnasts seem to be performing under semi-half, Bavasar, double front half, and that kind of gives you about a 6.2 start value. Loads of gymnasts that are at that point doing pretty much the same routine. You've got a Homer and a Makuts in there. So it'd be nice to see a bit more originality on P-bars. There's so many cool skills on P-bars that I don't think people utilise, but maybe in the next code when it's reduced to 8 skills, what will separate people a little bit more is doing some more unique gymnastics. So that'll be cool to see if that happens in the next code. And then on high bar, his high routine is just amazing. Be really cool to see whether in the Olympic high bar final, I think he has the potential to connect his Cassina to his Coleman, have the squat half looking in, and then his straight and straddle. The only area in his high bar routine where technically I think it's not quite as sound as all the rest of his high bar work is his dismount action. And you saw it at the All Japan Championships on the second day. He comes out so early on his action, so he tends to kick super early. And it's just really difficult then, when you're tired at the end of your routine, to make sure your body's upright and you can get that stick 9 times out of 10. He tends to sometimes land deep and take a big step forward. He needs to hold on to that action just a little bit longer. In a perfect world, you want to be aiming for the wires. So where the wires hit the floor, you want to be kicking round to there and then pushing the bar away. So you tend to see his dismount go quite long. And sometimes, it's an area. Be interesting to see at the Olympic Games, maybe the all-around final team competition, if it's neck and neck and tight with people, that is one spot where he could give away some tenths to the next team. We've had the Chinese championships have just happened. I haven't had time to go through and look at them and see the results. I know there were some big individual performances. I know particularly on rings, there was a 15-4 from Liu Yang, which I don't think anybody's really getting close to at the moment. Even Eleftherios Petronas, the great rings worker, friend of mine, quite far off that. So they've got some massive individual performances. I do like the gymnast that won the all-around and his high bar work in particular. Massively impressed with the improvements in the Chinese high bar work and just the technique on that apparatus and the fact that they're doing quite big skills on there now. There was a time where the Chinese wouldn't take much risks. They'd just do kachevs, do lots of in-bar stuff. Now they're doing Cassinas and Lukins, and that's great to see. It's really cool. Ultimately, they had to try and catch up the Japanese. So that's going to be really interesting to see them. I'd expect them to go toe-to-toe with the Japanese at the Olympic Games. Whether anyone else can get close, it'll be all to do with the mistakes, I think. That Olympic pressure is just a different beast. So whoever can go 18 for 18 out of those top 5 teams that I think are going to be Japan, China, America, Ukraine, GB, any of them go 18 for 18, they're going to have a good shot at a medal. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll probably come down to mistakes, thinking it will be decided by big mistakes in the end. You tend to get in those team finals, it's all about how you start on floor. Floor's a risky apparatus. So the order that you get, whether you're starting on floor or pommels, I think if you start on pommels and you hit pommels, it puts you in the driving seat going into the last apparatus. Starting on floor, it's all about your landings. A few big steps on them landings, stepping out of bounds, that can all of a sudden, a score that's a 14-8, 14-9 can go right down to a 13-8, 13-9. It makes a big difference. I think confidence-wise, if you can go to pommel, start on pommel and hit 3-for-3 routines, it's going to be huge. So I think it's probably going to come down more to the mistakes that are made rather than the incredible performances, because I think all of the performances will be incredible by the Olympic Games. But yeah, really excited to watch that, see it develop, and continue to do these episodes as we build into the Olympic Games. I think these are really good, specific gymnastics content for gymnastics fans. So if you've enjoyed it, we'd like to hear a bit of your feedback as well. So if you've listened to any of the recent episodes with guests, we'd love to hear what you think. If there's anything you'd like us to focus on the solo episodes, please let us know. You can leave your feedback on YouTube in the comments section. You can leave it on Instagram. You can contact me directly. If you could like, subscribe, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, wherever you listen to the podcast, it does make a big difference. We want to continue to bring you content like this. We're constantly trying to evolve and improve the experience that you have when you listen and watch the podcast. So that feedback makes a big, big difference. It means that we can continue to do this and strive to improve it week on week. It's a lot of effort that gets put into this. You know, me and Sam have now been doing this for 65 episodes. That's 65 weeks. We put a lot of energy into it. We hope that that translates into the quality of the product that you guys get on the other end of that, whether it's through a set of headphones or through the screen. But that feedback is really important to us. So let us know, and we're going to continue to bring you quality content that hopefully is valuable and bring you really interesting and exciting guests. And particularly in the lead up to the Olympic Games, we're going to hope to get on some big names that are going to be involved with that competition, not only from gymnastics on the men's side, but also the women's side. We've got a really exciting guest next week that's going to be from the world of women's gymnastics. Super exciting. I'm looking forward to that one. And yeah, well, thank you for listening. We really do appreciate it. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Keep listening and supporting, and thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one.